Story number 1. The Green Eyes Beneath the Ice. Winter in Minnesota is unforgiving. The landscape transforms into a vast expanse of white, where silence reigns supreme and the cold seeps into every fiber of your being. Lake Superior, with its immense size and treacherous conditions, is a place both revered and feared by those who dare to brave its frozen surface. I had always been drawn to its stark beauty, the way the ice stretched endlessly, broken only by the occasional crack or ripple that hinted at the hidden depths below. It was the beginning of December when my friends and I decided to embark on an ice fishing trip. We were seasoned anglers, familiar with the lake's moods and quirks, but this year felt different. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a sense that the lake held secrets we were yet to uncover. The stories circulated around town were enough to give anyone pause, tales of unexplained phenomena, of men who ventured out onto the ice and never returned, of eerie green eyes that glowed beneath the surface in the dead of night. I had heard them all before, dismissing them as mere folklore meant to keep the unwary away. But as we drove deeper into the heart of the lake, the gravity of the situation settled over me like a heavy blanket. The snow was falling thick and fast, reducing visibility to mere feet. Our truck skidded slightly on the slick road, but with careful navigation, we reached our designated spot, a secluded area surrounded by dense forests that seemed to close in around us. Setting up camp was a ritual we knew well. We drilled holes into the ice, each one a promise of a bountiful catch and hours of camaraderie. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the frozen expanse. As night fell, the temperature plunged, and the world around us grew quiet, the only sounds the distant howling of the wind and the occasional creak of the ice beneath our feet. We sat around our small heater, sharing stories and laughing, the warmth of the fire a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. It was then that Jake, the most superstitious among us, brought up the local legend of the Green Eyes. "Ever heard about the green eyes beneath the ice?" he asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say it's the spirit of a fisherman who got caught in a sudden storm. His eyes still watch over the lake, searching for those who disrespect it." I rolled my eyes, but there was an edge of unease in his tone that made me pause. "Sounds like something to scare off newbies," I replied, trying to mask my discomfort. Emily, always the skeptic, chimed in. "There's no such thing. It's just stories to keep people from venturing too far out." But Jake wasn't convinced. "People have disappeared out there. Sometimes you hear them talking about strange lights and eyes. It's not just a myth." We fell into a contemplative silence, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows around us. The temperature continued to drop, and our breaths became visible in the frigid air. The night was deepening, and the lake stretched out before us, a glassy surface that seemed to hold its breath. Around midnight, the stillness was shattered by a sudden, piercing crack. The ice beneath our feet groaned ominously, and a shiver ran down my spine. "Probably just the ice shifting," I muttered, trying to steady my nerves. But then I saw it, a pair of bright green eyes staring back at me from beneath the ice. They glowed with an unnatural intensity, piercing the darkness like twin beacons of malevolence. My heart raced as I stared, unable to look away. The eyes seemed to bore into my soul, their gaze filled with sorrow and something far more sinister. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin, the chill from the lake seeping into my bones. "Guys, look at that," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. Jake and Emily turned to see what I was pointing at, their expressions shifting from skepticism to horror as they took in the sight. The eyes remained fixed on us, unblinking and unwavering. Suddenly, the ice around the eyes began to bubble and churn, as if something was trying to break free from its icy prison. Before any of us could react, a pale white hand shot out from the water, its fingers elongated and claw-like. Time seemed to slow as it reached towards me, the sheer force of its presence overwhelming. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The hand grabbed hold of my arm, its grip icy and unyielding, pulling me towards the depths below. "Help me!" I managed to gasp, struggling against the supernatural force. But the hand was relentless, dragging me further onto the ice. My friends watched in terror, unable to move as the scene unfolded before them. Desperate, I mustered all my strength and pushed against the hand, breaking free from its grip. I stumbled back, gasping for breath, the cold seeping into my lungs like icy tendrils. The eyes beneath the ice flickered for a moment, then vanished, leaving nothing but the smooth surface of the frozen lake. Shaken, I turned to my friends, my heart still pounding in my chest. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice hoarse. "Now." But before we could pack up, another pair of green eyes appeared, this time much closer. The ice cracked again, and another pale hand reached out, its intent clear. The realization hit me like a freight train. We weren't dealing with a mere spirit. This was something far more powerful and malevolent, an entity bound to the lake by tragedy and vengeance. Emily grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the truck. "We have to go, now," she shouted over the rising wind, her fear palpable. We scrambled to our feet, the frost biting at our exposed skin as we hurried to dismantle our equipment. The hands on the ice seemed to reach out, fingers twitching as if trying to hold us back. The eyes continued to glow, now appearing in multiple locations around the lake, each pair filled with an insatiable hunger. As we reached the truck, the wind intensified, driving snow into our faces and making it difficult to see. I fumbled with the keys, my hands numb, when the driver's door slammed shut with a violent force. Panic surged through me as I realized we were trapped, the entity of the lake determined to claim us as it had others before. "We have to force the door," Jake yelled, trying to kick it open, but the door held firm, as if an invisible barrier prevented us from escaping. The green eyes continued to appear and disappear, surrounding us with their unholy gaze. The whispers of the lost fishermen echoed in my mind, their pleas for release drowned out by the storm's fury. I felt a growing sense of despair, the realization that we were at the mercy of something ancient and unforgiving. Suddenly, the ice beneath our feet began to tremble, and the lake seemed to roar with a life of its own. The hands broke free from their icy confines, reaching towards us with a desperate hunger. I could feel their cold touch on my skin, their spectral presence overwhelming my senses. In a final, desperate attempt, I pushed against the door with all my might, my fingers numb from the cold. The door gave way, bursting open and allowing us to escape the clutches of the lake. We stumbled into the storm, the wind tearing at our clothes and the snow blinding us as we ran towards the truck. Behind us, the eyes faded into the darkness, their whispers lingering in the air like a haunting memory. The storm showed no signs of relenting, but we didn't stop until we were far enough away to feel the oppressive presence lift. Breathless and battered, we collapsed into the truck, the engine roaring to life as we sped away from the cursed lake. The silence that followed was deafening, the memory of the green eyes and the pale hands etched into my mind like a permanent scar. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes and the spectral hands reaching out from the ice. The stories of Death Valley were no longer mere tales to scare off the uninitiated, they were warnings of a darkness that lurked beneath the surface, ready to claim the unwary. I shared our experience with others, hoping to spare them from the same fate. But the lake remained, its icy expanse holding its secrets tightly, the green eyes watching from below, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to venture too close. Years later, the memory still haunts me. Whenever winter approaches, I find myself drawn back to Lake Superior, not out of desire, but out of a need to confront the fear that still lingers. The lake's beauty remains, but so does the darkness beneath, a reminder that some places hold more than just natural wonders, they hold the restless spirits of those lost to the unforgiving cold. Story number 2. The Miner's Curse. I've always been fascinated by the untamed wilderness, the kind that strips you down to your bare essentials and challenges every ounce of your resilience. So when my friends, Sarah, Mike, and Emily, and I decided to spend a winter weekend camping in Death Valley, it felt like the perfect adventure. Little did we know, the valley held secrets buried deep in its scorching sands and bitter cold nights. We arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. The vast expanse of Death Valley stretched out before us, a desolate beauty that was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Setting up our campsite near an old, abandoned mining site, we felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a hint of unease. The stories we'd heard about the lost miners from the 19th century were more than just ghost tales, they were warnings. As night fell, the temperature plummeted sharply, the desert's daytime heat giving way to an unforgiving chill. We huddled around the campfire, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold that crept into our bones. Sarah, ever the skeptic, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, while Mike and Emily shared local legends about the miners who vanished without a trace. They say those miners never left, Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper. Their spirits are trapped here, wandering the valley for eternity. On cold winter nights, you can hear the clinking of their crowbars and their desperate whispers, urging you to leave. I chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the creeping dread. Come on, Emily. Ghost stories don't scare me. But as the night deepened, an oppressive silence settled over us, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire. The stars glittered overhead, their light reflecting off the snow that had begun to blanket the valley floor. It was then, around midnight, that we heard it, a faint clinking sound, like metal striking metal, echoing through the stillness. Sarah froze, her eyes wide. Did you guys hear that? Mike nodded, his face pale. Probably just the wind. But the clinking continued, growing louder and more insistent. Alongside it came a low, mournful whisper, barely audible over the sound of the wind. Go, or be buried here forever. A chill ran down my spine. The temperature seemed to drop even further, our breaths visible in the cold night air. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, trying to locate the source of the noise. The abandoned mining site loomed in the distance, its shadows deep and foreboding. Maybe someone's lost, Sarah suggested, her voice shaky. We should check it out. Emily hesitated, glancing nervously at the dark outline of the mines. I don't know if that's a good idea. What if it's the spirits Emily was talking about? But curiosity got the better of us. We decided to investigate, leaving the safety of our campsite behind. Bundling up in our warmest clothes, we trudged through the snow, the clinking sounds guiding us towards the old mine entrance. The path was treacherous, the snow making every step a struggle against the biting cold and the eerie silence that enveloped us. As we approached the entrance, the clinking stopped abruptly, replaced by the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. The whispers grew louder, more desperate. Leave now, or join us. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside the mine, flashlight in hand. The narrow tunnel was dark and claustrophobic, the walls cold to the touch. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else I couldn't quite place, a metallic tang that made my skin crawl. We moved deeper into the mine, the only sounds our footsteps and the distant echoes of the whispers. Suddenly, a flickering red light appeared ahead, moving back and forth like a beacon. My mind raced with fear and curiosity. What was that light? Was it a person, or something more sinister? As we drew closer, the red light materialized into a figure, a miner dressed in tattered clothes, his face obscured by shadows. His eyes were hollow voids, devoid of any emotion, staring straight ahead as if seeing something beyond our understanding. In his hand, he held a crowbar, the metal glinting ominously in the dim light. Go, leave now, his voice echoed, filled with an unearthly sorrow. Mike took a step back, fear etched on his face. We should go. Now. But before we could turn, another figure appeared beside the first, another miner with the same hollow eyes and the same desperate plea. The mine seemed to come alive with these apparitions, their numbers growing as more figures emerged from the darkness, each one holding a tool of their trade, each one staring with those empty eyes. Panic set in as we realized the gravity of our situation. The whispers turned into wails of anguish, the spirits reaching out with invisible hands, pulling us deeper into the mine. I grabbed Sarah's arm, trying to pull her away, but the grip of fear was too strong. The mine's walls seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against us from all sides. Run! I shouted, breaking free from my paralysis. We sprinted down the tunnel, the spirits in hot pursuit, their cries echoing through the mine like the tormented souls of the lost miners. The red light flashed wildly ahead, guiding us towards the exit, but the path back seemed endless, each step harder than the last. Just when I thought we couldn't go any further, we burst out of the mine entrance, the cold night air hitting us like a physical blow. The red light was gone, the whispers silenced, leaving us gasping for breath in the snowy darkness. The storm had intensified, the wind howling through the valley, but we didn't stop running until we were back at our campsite, the fire's warmth a welcome relief. We collapsed by the fire, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, the reality of what we'd experienced sinking in. The legends weren't just stories, they were warnings, remnants of a tragic past that refused to stay buried. The lost miners, trapped in an eternal cycle of despair, had reached out to us, wanting us to leave their domain or join them in their endless torment. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the valley, we packed up our gear in silence, the memory of the night's events etched into our minds. The abandoned mine stood silent once more, the spirits returning to their eternal vigil, their hollow eyes watching from the shadows. Years have passed since that fateful winter night, but the memory remains vivid, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Whenever I visit Death Valley now, especially in the dead of winter, I can't help but glance towards the old mining site, feeling a lingering sense of being watched, a testament to the enduring power of the legends that warn us of the unseen dangers lurking in the wilderness. Story number 3. Eyes of Darkness. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, the untouched expanses where nature reigns supreme and the chaos of everyday life feels miles away. So when my friends, Jake, Emily, and Marcus, and I decided to spend a weekend camping in the Adirondack Mountains, it felt like the perfect escape. Little did we know, the Adirondacks held secrets far darker than we could have ever imagined. It was late November, and the first heavy snows had begun to blanket the forest in a thick layer of white. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine was invigorating as we set up our campsite near a secluded lake. The plan was simple: hike during the day, explore the surrounding trails, and relax by the fire at night. But as dusk settled, an uneasy feeling began to creep into the night air. We gathered around the campfire, the flames flickering and casting long shadows among the trees. Jake, always the skeptic, joked about local legends and ghost stories, trying to lighten the mood. Emily, who had grown up in the area, was more reserved, her eyes darting nervously into the darkness beyond the firelight. Marcus, the photographer, was busy capturing the serene beauty of our surroundings, unaware of the tension building around him. "Have you guys heard about the Eyes of Darkness?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She paused, gauging our reactions. "They say it's this entity that roams the Adirondacks in the dead of winter, watching campers from the shadows." Jake laughed, shaking his head. "Come on, Emily. That's just another one of those creepy stories to scare tourists." But Emily remained serious. "It's not just a story. There have been disappearances, people who ventured too deep into the forest and never came back. Locals say the Eyes of Darkness lure you in with a red light, and once you follow it, you can't escape." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to brush it off. "Sounds like something out of a horror movie," I said, attempting to sound nonchalant. Marcus looked up from his camera, curiosity piqued. "Is there any truth to it?" Emily nodded slowly. "There have been sightings, especially during heavy snowstorms. The light appears near campsites, and those who see it are compelled to follow. It's said that once you're in the Eyes of Darkness grip, you're lost forever." As the night deepened, the wind began to howl through the trees, and the temperature dropped sharply. We huddled closer to the fire, the flames struggling against the encroaching cold. The forest around us seemed to grow quieter, the usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife silenced by the storm. Around midnight, the first heavy gusts of wind kicked up, swirling snow into our campsite. The fire flickered violently, casting eerie shadows that danced among the trees. It was then that I saw it, a faint, pulsing red light moving between the trees at the edge of our campsite. My heart skipped a beat as I exchanged a nervous glance with Jake and Marcus. "Did you guys see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Jake nodded, his skepticism wavering. "Probably just a reflection or something. Don't let it scare you." But Marcus wasn't so sure. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it towards the light, trying to get a better look. The red light moved with an unnatural fluidity, almost beckoning us. My stomach churned with unease, but curiosity got the better of me. "Should we check it out?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and intrigue. Emily hesitated, but the desperation in her eyes mirrored my own. "Maybe we can help whoever, or whatever, it is." Against our better judgment, we decided to follow the light. Bundling up against the cold, we trudged through the deep snow, the red glow guiding us deeper into the forest. The trees loomed overhead, their branches heavy with snow, creating a tunnel of darkness that seemed to swallow us whole. As we walked, the light remained just ahead, never faltering, never wavering. The whispers of the wind became more pronounced, carrying faint, sorrowful cries that sent shivers down my spine. The path became less defined, the snow making every step a struggle. After what felt like hours, we reached a clearing bathed in the eerie red light. In the center stood a large, ancient tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The light hovered above it, pulsating softly. As we approached, the air grew colder, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Suddenly, the light intensified, and a figure materialized within it, a shadowy form with hollow, dark eyes that seemed to pierce through our very souls. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared into the void where his eyes should have been. "Why are you following us?" I demanded, trying to steady my voice. The figure remained silent, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble as the presence of the eyes of darkness became overwhelming. I felt a magnetic pull, an invisible force dragging me closer to the entity. Jake tried to pull me back, but the grip of fear held me in place. "We need to go," he shouted, but his words were drowned out by the storm's fury. Marcus stepped forward, his flashlight flickering. "We don't want any trouble. Let us go." The figure began to move towards us, the red light enveloping his form like a shroud. The whispers turned into agonized screams, echoing from the depths of hell. The temperature plummeted further, the cold seeping into my bones as the entity closed the distance between us. In a desperate attempt to break free, I grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him away, the sheer terror forcing me to act. "Run!" I yelled, pushing him and Marcus toward the edge of the clearing. We sprinted through the snow, the red light and the screaming entity in hot pursuit. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes that reached out like hands trying to pull us back. Every step felt like a battle against the storm, the cold numbing my limbs and clouding my thoughts. Behind us, the eyes of darkness loomed larger, the screams growing louder, more intense. I glanced back to see the entity now directly behind us, its hollow eyes staring into mine, draining every ounce of courage I had left. "Don't look back!" I shouted, pushing myself to run faster. But the pull of fear was too strong. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, seeing the red light engulf the entity as it surged forward. The screams felt like they were tearing through my very being, pulling me back into the darkness. With a final burst of adrenaline, I pushed through the trees, the storm showing no signs of letting up. The snow stung my face, and my breaths came in ragged gasps as I stumbled through the thickening blizzard. The path back seemed endless, every step a struggle against the freezing cold and the relentless pursuit of the eyes of darkness. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, the trees began to thin, and the first hints of dawn painted the sky with streaks of pink and orange. Exhausted and frostbitten, I collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, my friends beside me, equally drained but alive. We lay there in silence, the storm finally beginning to abate. The red light and the screams had vanished, replaced by the soft whisper of the morning breeze through the trees. Slowly, we gathered our belongings, our movements sluggish from the cold and exhaustion. As we made our way back to our campsite, the sun broke fully over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the pristine snow. The forest no longer seemed menacing, the shadows receding with the light. But the memory of the eyes of darkness lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. Back at camp, we sat around the fire once more, the flames providing a comforting warmth. Emily broke the silence, her voice soft but resolute. "We were lucky tonight. The eyes of darkness don't let go easily." Jake nodded, his skepticism shattered. "I don't know how we got away, but we did. Maybe we helped whatever that was find some peace." Marcus, still shaken, added, "Or maybe we just escaped its wrath. Either way, I'm never ignoring a local legend again." As we packed up to leave, the Adirondack Mountains stood silent and majestic around us, the snow glistening in the morning light. The eyes of darkness remained a mystery, a shadowy presence that watched from the depths of the forest. We left with a newfound respect for the legends that warn us of the unseen dangers that lurk in the wilderness. Years have passed since that night, but the memory remains vivid in my mind. Whenever I visit the Adirondacks, especially during the winter, I feel a lingering sense of being watched, a reminder of the eyes of darkness and the thin line between belief and fear. The mountains hold their secrets tightly, and some stories, I've learned, are best left unexplored. Story number 4. The White Whisper of Crater Lake. Crater Lake has always held a special place in my heart. Growing up in Oregon, I remember the tales my grandparents would tell me about its deep blue waters and the legends that shrouded its icy expanse. As a child, I was captivated by stories of its majestic beauty, but as I grew older, curiosity led me to seek out the truth behind the whispers that lingered in the cold winter air. It was the winter of 2018 when I decided to embark on a solo trip to Crater Lake. Having spent years working as a journalist, I was no stranger to chasing stories, but this was personal. My grandmother had passed away that year, leaving behind tales of the lake that now felt like fragments of a forgotten past. She had spoken of a white spirit, a ghostly figure that haunted the frozen surface, drawing unsuspecting souls into its icy grip. Skeptical yet intrigued, I wanted to experience it for myself. The journey to Crater Lake was serene, the landscape transformed by a thick blanket of snow. The towering pines stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with frost. As I approached the rim, the lake sprawled out before me, a vast expanse of glassy ice reflecting the pale winter sun. The air was crisp, each breath a visible puff that quickly dissipated into the cold. I set up camp near the edge, the frozen lake stretching endlessly into the horizon. The isolation was both comforting and unnerving, the silence amplified by the crunch of my boots on the snow. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the first stars began to pierce the dark sky. I wrapped myself in layers, determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. Around midnight, the stillness of the night was broken by a faint whisper, barely audible over the howling wind. I paused, straining to listen. It sounded like a distant voice, calling out from the depths of the lake. My heart raced as I remembered my grandmother's stories. "It's just the wind," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the eerie sound. But the whispers persisted, growing slightly louder, more distinct. "Come closer, don't leave me." The voice was haunting, filled with an otherworldly sorrow that sent chills down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, and scanned the surface of the lake. There, amidst the ice, I saw it, a faint, white figure hovering just above the water. My skepticism wavered as the apparition became clearer. The spirit was ethereal, its form shifting and shimmering in the moonlight. It gazed directly at me, its presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. I felt an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer to the haunted ice. My legs moved on their own accord, stepping towards the edge of the lake. "Stop," I whispered, but the voice echoed in my mind, urging me forward. I reached out, fingers grazing the icy surface, and the ground beneath me seemed to vanish. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth of the legend. I was being pulled towards the spirit, towards an icy embrace from which there was no escape. Desperate to break free, I tried to turn back, but my body resisted. The wind howled louder, the whispers turning into wails of anguish. The spirit floated closer, its hollow eyes devoid of life, yet filled with an eternal sorrow. Memories of my grandmother's voice, recounting her own encounters with the lake's phantom, flooded my mind. She had warned me of the spirit's power, of the souls it claimed each winter. Summoning every ounce of strength, I forced myself to break the trance. "I won't be taken," I declared, my voice shaky but resolute. The spirit recoiled, its form flickering as if struggling to maintain its presence. The pull lessened, and I stumbled back, collapsing onto the snow-covered ground. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold seeping into my bones. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the spirit let out a mournful cry, a sound that seemed to resonate from the very heart of the lake. The whispers returned, softer this time, filled with gratitude rather than desperation. "Thank you." The voice lingered in the air, a fading echo that left me shaken but alive. I lay there for what felt like hours, gathering the strength to stand. The first light of dawn began to break, casting a pale glow over the frozen lake. The spirit was gone, leaving behind only the lingering sense of its sorrowful presence. I knew then that some legends were rooted in truth, that Crater Lake held secrets beyond human understanding. Packing up my gear, I took one last look at the tranquil ice, now devoid of any spectral presence. The experience had changed me, instilling a deep respect for the mysteries that nature conceals. As I made my way back to civilization, the memory of the White Whisper stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Years later, I still think back to that winter night at Crater Lake. The legend of the White Spirit remains a part of my family's history, a tale of love and loss that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Whenever I visit the lake now, especially in the dead of winter, I feel a connection to the spirits that linger on its icy surface, forever entwined with the beauty and tragedy of Crater Lake. Story number 5. Midnight Knocks. I've always believed that the Great Smoky Mountains held secrets deeper than their dense forests and mist-covered peaks. Growing up just a short drive away, I'd heard countless tales spun by locals, stories of unexplained phenomena, ghostly apparitions, and eerie noises that pierced the stillness of the night. But nothing could have prepared me for what my family and I experienced during our winter camping trip. It was early December, and the air was crisp with the promise of the first heavy snowfall of the season. My wife, Laura, our 12-year-old son, Ethan, and I decided to escape the chaos of city life and spend a weekend in the tranquility of the Smokies. We set up our campsite near a secluded area, surrounded by towering pines and blanketed in pristine white snow. The world seemed to stand still, the usual sounds of wildlife hushed under the thick layer of snow. That first evening, we built a fire and huddled together in our tent, sharing stories and sipping hot cocoa. The temperature dipped steadily, and soon, the cold became almost unbearable. We retreated into our sleeping bags, the warmth of our bodies providing a small sanctuary against the biting chill outside. Around midnight, the forest was enveloped in an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of branches under the weight of snow. It was then that we heard it, a faint, rhythmic knocking at the entrance of our tent. My heart skipped a beat. I exchanged a worried glance with Laura, who was already halfway out of her sleeping bag. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her eyes wide with concern. "Probably just someone lost in the snow." I hesitated for a moment, then reached for the tent's flap. The snowstorm had intensified, reducing visibility to mere feet. I pulled the flap open cautiously, expecting to see a weary traveler seeking shelter. Instead, I was met with nothing but thick darkness and swirling white snow. The cold hit me like a physical force, causing me to shiver uncontrollably. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the howling wind and the relentless pounding of the storm. I glanced around, but the forest remained silent and impenetrable. Satisfied that no one was there, I closed the tent flap and returned to my sleeping bag, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the tent like a desperate plea. Laura and I sat up, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Ethan stirred, sensing our tension, and nestled closer to his mother. "I think it's someone really lost," Laura suggested, her voice shaky. "Maybe they need help." Determined to ensure our safety, I grabbed my flashlight and peered into the darkness beyond the tent. The beam of light cut through the storm, revealing nothing but endless snow and shadows. I stepped outside, braving the cold, and scanned the area. The knocking had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness. As I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye, a series of small footprints leading away from our tent and disappearing into the dense forest. They were unlike any tracks I'd ever seen, tiny, almost childlike, and perfectly spaced as if made by someone, or something, deliberately following a path. "Look," I called out, showing Laura the footprints. "Someone else is out here." She frowned, glancing at the trail. "But where are they going?" I followed the footprints with my gaze, noticing that they led toward a sheer cliff face not far from our campsite. The cliff loomed ominously, its jagged rocks hidden partially by the falling snow. A sense of dread settled over me as I realized that the footprints were leading to a place where few dared to venture, especially in such treacherous conditions. "We should stay inside," I said firmly. "It's too dangerous out there." But Laura shook her head. "If someone's out there, they might need our help. We can't just ignore them." Reluctantly, I agreed. We bundled ourselves in our warmest clothes and made our way toward the cliff, the footprints serving as our only guide. The storm raged on, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls, making every step a battle against the elements. Ethan clung to his mother, his eyes wide with fear and curiosity. As we approached the base of the cliff, the snow became even more intense, reducing visibility to nearly nothing. The footprints led us to the edge, where the ground was slick with ice and snow. There was no sign of anyone, no figure, no motion, just the endless expanse of white leading into the darkness beyond the cliff. Maybe they fell, Ethan suggested softly, his voice barely audible over the storm. I felt a chill run down my spine. We need to call for help, I replied, pulling out my phone. But there was no signal here, only the indifferent silence of the mountains. Suddenly, a faint whisper carried through the wind, sending shivers down my spine. It was almost inaudible, like the breath of the forest itself. "Don't leave me." I froze, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice. Laura grabbed my arm, her grip tight with fear. "We should go back," she insisted. But before we could turn, a figure emerged from the swirling snow, standing at the edge of the cliff. It was a man, dressed in a heavy coat that matched the red hue of the setting sun behind the clouds. His face was obscured by the darkness, but as he stepped into the beam of my flashlight, I could see that his eyes were missing, two deep black hollows where his eyes should have been. My breath caught in my throat. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer. He didn't respond, just stood there, staring blankly into our direction. A sense of overwhelming sorrow emanated from him, as if he was trapped in a moment of eternal despair. The footprints suddenly reappeared around our tent, this time leading directly to the cliff and disappearing where the man stood. "We have to help him," Laura said, her voice breaking. "He looks so lost." I wanted to protest, to tell her that whatever he was, it wasn't safe. But before I could speak, the man began to fade, his form dissolving into the swirling snowflakes until he was nothing more than a memory. The footprints, too, vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving us standing alone in the storm. Panic set in as the reality of the situation sank over us. We were miles from help, caught in a blizzard with no way out. The storm showed no signs of abating, and the darkness pressed in on us, heavy and oppressive. "We need to find shelter," I said, taking Laura's hand and pulling Ethan closer. "We can't stay here." We trudged back to our tent, the cold seeping into our bones with each step. As we huddled together inside, the knocking resumed, louder and more frantic than before. It seemed to come from all around us, as if the entire forest was reaching out to us with its spectral hands. "Please, don't leave me," the whispers echoed, now unmistakably clear. "Stay with me." I held Laura and Ethan tightly, my mind racing for answers. What had we encountered? A lost hiker? A spirit trapped in the mountains? The stories we'd heard now felt all too real, the line between legend and reality blurred by the storm's fury. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The knocking never ceased, nor did the whispers. Exhaustion and fear took their toll, and sleep became an elusive refuge from the nightmare we were trapped in. As dawn broke, the storm began to abate, the howling winds giving way to a heavy silence. We emerged from the tent, the world transformed by the night's events. The snow lay thick on the ground, covering our tracks and the footprints that had led us to the cliff. There was no sign of the man, no indication that he had ever been there. Only the lingering sense of sorrow and the memory of his hollow eyes haunted us as we made our way back to civilization. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the images from my mind, the desperate knocking, the missing eyes, the solitary footprints leading to the cliff. I spoke to locals, hoping to find someone who had experienced something similar, but the stories were scarce and fragmented, each one more cryptic than the last. One evening, as I sat by the fire in our home, Laura reached out and touched my arm gently. "I think we did something good," she said softly. "Maybe we helped a lost soul find peace." I wanted to believe her, to find solace in the thought that our actions had made a difference. But deep down, I knew that some mysteries of the mountains were best left unexplored. The Great Smoky Mountains had revealed a fragment of their darkness, a sorrowful spirit reaching out from the shadows, reminding us that even in the beauty of nature, there lies an undercurrent of the unknown. Years have passed since that fateful winter night, but the memory remains vivid, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the spirits that linger in the wilderness. Whenever the snow begins to fall, I think back to that night, the whispers in the dark, and the man with no eyes standing at the edge of the cliff, forever watching, forever waiting. Story number 6. The Man in the Snow Shadow. Mount Rainier has always been a beacon for adventurers and nature lovers, its majestic peak piercing the sky and its sprawling forests hiding secrets beneath a blanket of snow. Growing up in a small town near its base, I heard countless stories about the mountain, some inspiring, others chilling. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the man in the snow shadow. It was late October, just as the first snows began to fall. My friends and I decided to embark on a weekend camping trip, eager to escape the monotony of everyday life and immerse ourselves in the wilderness. We set up camp near Paradise, a popular area with breathtaking views and dense forests perfect for exploring. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine filled our lungs as we settled around the campfire, sharing tales and roasting marshmallows. As darkness enveloped the mountain, the temperature plummeted, and the wind began to howl through the trees. We huddled closer to the fire, our conversations dwindling as the night grew colder and the shadows deeper. It was then that Sarah, the most superstitious among us, began to speak in hushed tones. "Have you guys heard about the man in the snow shadow?" she asked, her eyes darting nervously into the darkness. We exchanged skeptical glances. "What are you talking about?" Jake asked, poking the fire with a stick. "They say that during heavy snowstorms, a man dressed in a dark red coat appears near the campsites. His face is completely devoid of eyes, just deep black hollows where they should be. If you see him and try to approach, he vanishes, leaving only solitary footprints leading into the forest. Some say he's a lost soul, others believe he's a harbinger of doom." We laughed it off, attributing it to local folklore meant to spook unwary campers. But as the night wore on, the wind's wail seemed to echo Sarah's story, making us uneasy. Around midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, and the fire flickered violently as gusts of wind swept through the campsite. We bundled ourselves into our sleeping bags, the room filled with the sound of the storm outside. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, a faint rustling noise caught my attention. I opened my eyes to see two of my friends, Mark and Lisa, staring intently into the darkness beyond the firelight. "What's up?" I whispered, trying not to disturb their uneasy state. Mark pointed towards the edge of the clearing. "Do you see that?" At first, I couldn't discern anything through the howling wind and swirling snow. But then, amidst the blinding white, a figure began to materialize, a man in a dark red coat, standing motionless in the snow. His presence was unsettling, an unnatural stillness contrasting with the relentless storm. Most chilling of all were his eyes, or rather, the lack thereof. His face was an empty void, two deep black hollows where his eyes should have been, staring back at us with an otherworldly emptiness. We sat frozen, the tales of Sarah resurfacing in our minds. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, an ominous sentinel in the heart of the storm. My heart pounded in my chest as I felt an inexplicable urge to reach out, to understand who, or what, he was. But the fear held me back, keeping me rooted to the spot. Minutes felt like hours as we watched him, the storm intensifying around us. Then, without warning, the man began to fade, his form dissolving into the swirling snowflakes until he was nothing more than a memory. But just as he vanished, two solitary footprints appeared in the snow, leading directly into the dense forest. Jake, always the bravest, grabbed his flashlight and shone it towards the footprints. "We need to check this out," he said, his voice barely masking his fear. Before any of us could protest, a fierce gust of wind knocked over our campfire, sending embers dancing into the night. Panic set in as we scrambled to relight the fire, the footprints beckoning us deeper into the unknown. Against our better judgment, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, we decided to follow them. The forest was a labyrinth of towering pines and hidden paths, the snow making every step treacherous. Our flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing only fleeting glimpses of the storm's fury. The footprints led us further away from camp, into a part of the forest we hadn't explored before. The trees here were older, their branches twisted and gnarled, casting long, sinister shadows. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small clearing illuminated by the pale light of the moon breaking through the clouds. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin, its windows dark and broken, the door hanging ajar. The footprints ended at the threshold, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over us. "Maybe we should go back," Lisa suggested, her voice trembling. But Jake, ever the skeptic, pushed the door open, revealing the interior of the cabin. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, the remnants of what once might have been a home. As we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us, the sound echoing through the empty rooms. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, our breaths visible in the freezing air. The whispers of the storm seemed to fade, replaced by a haunting silence. We stood in the dim light, trying to make sense of our surroundings. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw him, the man in the dark red coat, standing in the doorway, his empty eye sockets staring directly at me. Fear paralyzed me as he began to move towards us, each step deliberate and slow. The other two watched in horror, unable to tear their eyes away. As he approached, the room seemed to warp, the walls closing in, the air growing heavy with an unspoken sorrow. "Why are you here?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. He stopped just a few feet away, his presence overwhelming. In a voice that was both a whisper and a roar, he spoke, "You shouldn't have followed the footprints." Before I could react, the man extended a hand, his fingers long and cold. A powerful force pulled me towards him, my feet moving against my will. I felt a deep sadness emanating from him, a longing that transcended words. Memories of lost souls and untold tragedies flooded my mind, each one a testament to his eternal torment. Desperate to break free, I struggled against the invisible grip, but it was futile. The cabin seemed to dissolve around us, replaced by the vast expanse of the snow-covered forest. The man reached out again, his touch icy against my skin, and I felt a connection, an understanding of his endless plight. "You are lost too," he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. "Find your way, or remain forever in the snow shadow." With a final, soul-wrenching glance, he released me, and the grip lifted. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, the storm's fury resuming as if nothing had happened. My friends rushed to my side, concern etched on their faces. "We need to get out of here," Jake urged, pulling me to my feet. We fled the cabin, the footprints no longer visible behind us. The storm raged on, the way back to camp seeming longer and more treacherous than before. Every shadow felt menacing, every gust of wind a reminder of the man in the snow shadow. Hours later, exhausted and frostbitten, we stumbled back to our campsite, the first light of dawn breaking through the storm. The camp was untouched, our belongings still arranged as we had left them. It was as if the night had been a surreal nightmare, but the lingering chill and our shared experience left no doubt. The man in the snow shadow was real, a tragic figure bound to the mountain, forever watching, forever waiting. In the days that followed, we tried to piece together what had happened, but the memory remained vivid, a haunting reminder of our encounter. Mount Rainier holds many secrets, some better left undiscovered. But for those of us who dared to follow the footprints that night, the man in the snow shadow remains a presence, a spectral guardian of the mountain's deepest mysteries. Now, whenever I find myself near Mount Rainier, especially during a snowstorm, I can't help but glance into the swirling white, hoping never to cross paths with that sorrowful figure again. The memory serves as a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown, and the stories that linger in the shadows, waiting to be heard. Story number 7. Whispers in the Red Forest. I've always been drawn to Yosemite National Park, its towering granite cliffs and serene waterfalls offering a stark contrast to the chaos of my daily life. When I first heard about the Red Forest near Bridal Veil Falls, my curiosity was piqued. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, especially during the harsh winter months. They said that at midnight, when the world was enveloped in silence, the whispers of a woman could be heard emanating from the depths of the forest. Skeptical yet intrigued, I decided to investigate for myself. It was mid-December, and the park was transformed into a winter wonderland. Snow blanketed the ground, and the trees stood bare against the pale winter sky. I arrived on a Friday afternoon, setting up camp with a group of fellow outdoor enthusiasts. Among them were Sarah, a seasoned hiker with a keen sense of direction, Tom, an avid photographer eager to capture the park's beauty, and Emily, a local guide who knew the trails like the back of her hand. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the wind began to howl through the trees. We huddled around the campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the warmth. Emily mentioned the legend of the Red Forest, her voice tinged with a mix of reverence and fear. "They say it's the spirit of a young girl named May," she began, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Long ago, during a time of great unrest, an ancient ritual was performed here. May was chosen as a sacrifice, pushed into Bridal Veil Falls by those who believed it would bring them favor from the gods. Her spirit never found peace and now lingers, whispering to those who dare to enter her domain. Sarah scoffed. Sounds like just another ghost story to scare campers. Tom nodded in agreement. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for all those whispers. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. As the night grew deeper, the forest seemed to come alive with shadows dancing in the periphery of the firelight. The temperature continued to drop, and our breaths became visible in the frigid air. Around midnight, the forest fell eerily silent. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed in on all sides. It was then that the whispers began. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, like the rustling of leaves. But gradually, they grew louder, forming words that sent chills down my spine. Help me! I looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Sarah and Tom seemed unfazed, but Emily's expression had changed. Her eyes darted nervously towards the dense woods surrounding us. Did you hear that? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the whispers. Sarah laughed nervously. Probably just the wind playing tricks on us. But the whispers persisted, growing more distinct. Come closer, don't leave me. A cold sweat broke out across my skin as the words repeated, each time more urgent than the last. Tom stood up, his camera hanging forgotten by his side. This is getting creepy. Maybe we should call it a night. Before anyone could respond, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was a sound of pure anguish, echoing through the trees and freezing us in our tracks. Emily grabbed my arm, her grip tight and trembling. We need to leave. Now. We quickly packed up our gear, the once inviting trail now seeming like a labyrinth of darkness. As we made our way back to the main path, the whispers followed us, growing louder and more insistent. The forest seemed to close in around us, the snow crunching under our boots the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Suddenly, the path split into two. To the left, the trail was clear, leading back to our campsite. To the right, a narrow, overgrown path disappeared into the deeper forest, shrouded in shadows. The whispers seemed to emanate from that direction, pulling us towards it. I don't like this, Sarah said, her voice shaky. Let's stick to the main trail. But Emily shook her head. May's spirit wants us to understand her story. Maybe we can help her find peace. I hesitated, torn between fear and the desire to uncover the truth. The scream still echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the legend we had dismissed so easily. Taking a deep breath, I nodded in agreement. We ventured down the narrow path, the snow thickening with each step. The trees here were denser, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. The whispers grew louder, forming a mournful melody that tugged at our souls. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the center stood the remnants of an ancient altar, covered in frost and surrounded by withered offerings. Bridal Veil Falls roared nearby, its waters cascading down with relentless force. The air was thick with sorrow, the weight of May's anguish palpable. Emily approached the altar, her hands trembling as she examined the weathered carvings. This is where the ritual was performed. May's spirit is bound to this place, unable to move on. Tom snapped photos, capturing the desolate beauty of the scene. Is there a way to help her? Emily nodded. We need to perform a ritual of our own, to honor her memory and release her spirit. Sarah looked skeptical. And how exactly do we do that? Emily took a deep breath. We need to offer something of ourselves, a gesture of respect and compassion. It's the only way to break the cycle. As we prepared, the temperature plummeted further, our breaths forming icy clouds in the air. The whispers intensified, surrounding us with their spectral presence. Stay with me, don't leave me. I placed my hand on the altar, feeling the cold stone seep into my skin. We're here to help you, May. Let us honor your memory. The ground beneath us seemed to tremble, and the whispers coalesced into a single, mournful voice. Thank you for remembering me. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, lifting the snow and swirling it into a vortex around us. The waterfall's roar became a distant hum, replaced by the ethereal sounds of May's voice. As we chanted the words of the ritual, a faint light began to emanate from the altar, growing brighter with each passing moment. The oppressive weight of sorrow lifted, replaced by a sense of peace that enveloped us all. Suddenly, a figure appeared before us. May stood gracefully, her form shimmering with an otherworldly glow. Her eyes, once hollow and filled with despair, now held a gentle warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a soft breeze. "I can finally rest." With those final words, May began to fade, her presence dissolving into the night air. The whisper ceased, replaced by the soothing sounds of the forest reclaiming its silence. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that felt like a balm to our souls. We stood in the clearing, the snow settling softly around us. The altar, once a symbol of sorrow, now felt like a place of closure and healing. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the peace that had been restored. "We did it," she said softly. "We helped her find peace." As we made our way back to the main trail, the forest seemed less foreboding, the shadows less menacing. The whispers of the red forest had been silenced, replaced by the natural symphony of Yosemite's winter night. In the days that followed, I often found myself reflecting on that night. The legend of May had been more than just a ghost story, it was a reminder of the power of empathy and the importance of honoring those who came before us. Yosemite had revealed one of its deepest secrets to us, a tale of sorrow transformed into peace through our collective compassion. Years later, when I returned to the park, I passed by the red forest with a newfound respect. The whispers no longer haunt the winter nights, but the memory of May's story lingers, a testament to the enduring connection between the living and the spirits that walk among us.